So there's so much happening in our lives and in the world right now. That's a lot of change. And I want to talk about mainly about what we can do internally to be strong, to really create a solid core that we can reside in and depend upon with confidence. And to do that, I want to draw upon a teaching of the Buddha that we find in the middle length discourses. It's the fourth sutta, so number 4, and it's entitled Fear and Dread. So this is really about how to work with fear, how to work with turning to the future with worry and being affected by that. And I had not, before this time, I had not really thought about this sutta in this way, relevant to the time, the context we're in now. But of course, this kind of fear and dread comes up in our personal life and also in the cultural context again and again and again. Same problem 2,600 years ago as we've got now. So to look at this sutta, I'm not going to share it, but I'm going to just use it from my my phone to tell you the story. And it's always interesting to think about the context that the Buddhist teaching is put in, because he's usually addressing an individual or a group, and he does that in different ways depending on the person. And in this case, it's a very well-known, prestigious, prominent Brahmin who's come to see the Buddha. His name is Santussikā. And he comes with a question for the Buddha. So this would be kind of like being for the Buddha to be visited by a famous rabbi or a famous priest or minister who has many students and, definitely a holy life of his own. But he's looking at what the Buddha is doing and his disciples, and he asks a couple of questions. And the first question he asks is, so let's see, how does he put it? Those gentlemen who have gone forth out of faith from the lay life to homelessness, out of faith in you, have you, the worthy Gautama, to lead the way, help them out and give them encouragement. And those people follow the worthy Gautama's example. So it's not really a question, it's an observation, but he's kind of asking for confirmation. And you kind of, you can kind of see, sometimes we still see this, if someone is living lay life with their commitment to live according to the Dhamma, and maybe they're teaching, there might be a sense of kind of comparing, like what is it like for people to be monastics, and how does that work? And sometimes people look at the monastic life and they're like, yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. It's, too difficult or whatever, or, there can be all kinds of different perceptions. And so Santussikā's kind of checking out his perception here. It's like, okay, these people come, and it's not just monks, it's nuns too, but they come and they take dependence on the Buddha, and they look to the Buddha and his example and receive his guidance. And the Buddha says, yes, it's true. They do. They are looking to me, and I am their example. I'm their guide and their example. And then he asks he sets up this, observation. He says, but remote lodgings in the wilderness, so kutis in the forest, or meditating under a tree or whatever, are challenging. It's hard to maintain seclusion and hard to find joy in solitude. The forest seemed to rob the mind of a mendicant who isn't immersed in samadhi. So it's like if you go to the forest and you're by yourself and you're practicing, you can kind of lose it if you're not really able to be in, samadhi all the time or whatever. And the Buddha said, yeah, it's true. And I've seen this in people, especially if someone's very idealistic and they hear the stories of you go to a cave or you go to the forest and you sit down and determine you're not going to get up and let my blood dry up and my sinews dry up and all that kind of very idealistic kind of language and imagery. And sometimes people just aren't well enough prepared, or there's, it's very hard to stay balanced. Or sometimes people go to the forest and they practice and they feel really good. Their meditation is going really well and they think they've broken through in their enlightenment, and they come back to the community. You hear this story over and over, and come back to the community and immediately they're irritated by people. And of course, it's hard to maintain a sense of reality sometimes by ourselves. So this is, and the Buddha is acknowledging that this can be true. You can kind of lose it there on your own. And then the Buddha starts to teach about his own experience before he was enlightened. So it's important to remember that what he's talking about here is, it's before he's really realized the whole truth of Nibbana, the deathless. And you can kind of think of him, we of course believe that the Buddha was so incredibly special, and he was a human being. And he had the same kinds of thoughts and mental states that we do, because he talks about that. And in this case, he says, I also thought that remote lodgings in the wilderness and the forest are challenging. It's hard to maintain this kind of solitude and be in seclusion. And it seems like it can really rob your mind. But then he had the thought, there are those people who go to these remote lodgings and try to live this way in the forest, ascetics and Brahmins with unpurified conduct of body, speech, and mind. And when they do that, they summon unskillful fear and dread because of these defects in their conduct. So what he's pointing out here is something that we might all feel. Well, let me go on first. And he says, but I don't go into this situation with unpurified conduct of body, speech, and mind. Basically, I keep the precepts. And so I'm one of those noble ones who goes into this situation with purified body, speech, and mind, and seeing this purity of conduct in myself, I feel even more unruffled about staying in the forest. So I want to, first of all, identify that we may have trouble acknowledging or recognizing that we have purified conduct of body, speech, and mind. And it might be the case that we think, well, I'm not perfect. I do things that are infractions of the precepts. But the importance there is that we acknowledge it, we let it go, we learn from it, and not to carry that as if it's some kind of stain on the mind, but instead recommit and live by the precepts. And having that understanding that this is where I'm continually coming back to, or purifying over time. And I think most people here have had that experience of seeing our own conduct by body, speech, and mind become more skillful over time as we are using the precepts and learning from our experience with them. And so what the Buddha is saying is we can actually look at ourselves and recognize our own improvement and our own purity. And that when we can, keep the 5 precepts pretty well, we can have a sense of real confidence in ourselves. And the Buddha talks about this in other places too. Like if we really are, like doing a pretty good job, it's never going to be perfect, maybe, but pretty good job with our conduct of body, speech, and mind, we can really have our, confidence, and you might say hold our head high in whatever group we're in, whatever assembly we're in. Even if someone blames us for something, it's not true. They don't have a basis for it. So I want to encourage, like, really taking a moment to think about that kind of purity in ourselves. And like I said, even if we're kind of working with a precept and making progress with it, this also is part of the practice and development. And how is it that when we feel like we're really not, like we're impure in some way, and people who, he's talking about, like maybe monks or ascetics who really aren't living according to what they claim to be. Like the Buddha will often talk about, people who are claiming to be celibate, but they're not celibate. They're actually not trying to be celibate. They're trying to hide their lack of celibacy. For instance, such a person doesn't feel confident because there's that dishonest thing going on inside. They're not admitting mistakes and learning from them. They're living in a way that's not pure. And then they're not going to have confidence. They're actually going to evoke fear and dread in themselves when they're in challenging situations. So what I want to encourage here is the acknowledgement of our own inner stability, and really encourage that perception of yourself so you can rely on it and have that confidence. And then the Buddha talks about having purified livelihood. So this, again, it's similar, but we talk about livelihood and the way we gain our requisites, what we live on. And if we're doing that in a pure way or an impure way, are we deceiving people? Are we lying to people about something? Trying to, there's sometimes when we get scam calls, we talk to them about their livelihood. Some people will engage with us around this. It's pretty, like interesting to consider that you're probably miles and miles away from unpurified livelihood. And then to acknowledge that there's a reason to feel confident having purified livelihood. And there's no need to evoke this fear and dread, but instead to be confident. And the Buddha goes point by point. He talks about those who enter this kind of situation having acute lust, being full of desire. But he wasn't full of desire. that people might be full of ill will, have malicious intentions, but he had a heart full of loving kindness. That someone might be overcome with dullness and drowsiness, but he was free of dullness and drowsiness. And this doesn't mean exhaustion or tiredness, but this is a being checked out, being, kind of lost in the fog. But to come out of that, when that comes up, to handle it in order to be free of it. And he talks about being restless and not having peace of mind. So these are, of course, the hindrances, the 5 hindrances that we talk about. And whenever they arise, there are ways of handling them, managing them. It's not like we're somehow disqualifying ourselves from that confidence when these things happen. It's natural. It's karmic. It's old. It comes from causes and conditions. But then we have the tools to work with whatever that is and bring it into alignment again. And that very process develops a kind of strength in us. Sometimes even more strength than if that episode didn't happen. Because we're developing the ability to manage it, to handle it, to come back to the Dhamma, come back to our own inner stability. And the same with doubt. And then he talks about those who glorify themselves and put others down, and that this too is a basis for kind of evoking fear and dread. Or we might say, in certain situations, being overcome by these oppressive conditions. But instead, if we don't glorify ourselves and disparage or put others down, then we don't have the karmic seeds for also being put down. We don't have the karmic seeds, for falling off that pedestal we put ourselves up on. And even if people do want to put us down, it rolls off in a way that it wouldn't otherwise. So this is another way that we strengthen ourselves by observing when we have that impulse to glorify ourselves and put someone else down, that we resist that and we go the other way to be more circumspect and appreciative of the good and clear about what's not good in ourselves and in others. And he says there are those who enjoy gain or possessions, honor, and popularity. So gain, praise, and popularity. And if we're attached to those things, or we're trying to do things to build that up in our experience, in our life, then we also are at risk. We also are unstable because we can lose all of that. So if we're basing our feeling of feeling good on those kinds of things, on other people's opinions, on the likes you get on YouTube or some whatever, or basing on our possessions and what we have, if this is our view of ourselves, we're based on these things that are unstable, then we also are susceptible to fear arising and dread arising. Unwholesome fear and dread. Kind of makes you wonder, though, there is a kind of wholesome fear we have to remember that helps to alert us when we need to maybe quickly remove ourselves from a situation or something like that. That's another point of discernment that's important. And then the Buddha talks about those who are lazy, whereas he is energetic. Those who are unmindful and lack the awareness of their environment, so sati sampajanya, as opposed to having that sati and sampajanya. And then those who lack immersion or have straying minds, but he's developing the stillness and stability of mind, collectedness of mind. And finally, he talks about those who are witless and idiotic and how he's developed in wisdom, accomplished in wisdom. And so I think it's valuable to look at these points and to recognize these good qualities in ourselves. And where we feel like there's something that we could improve upon, to do that, but not with this idea that I'm somehow going to perfect it, because that isn't how this existence in samsara works, since everything's constantly changing. It's more like leaning, inclining, and supporting ourselves in the direction of those positive sides of these points. And to use that reflection to acknowledge that that's happening in us in a way that we can be strong internally and build that core of strength that causes whatever fear and dread that might arise to vanish, to be insubstantiated. So this is like you go to the gym and you're working on your core muscles. This is how we can strengthen ourselves in a way that we then can really be more equipped to deal with what's happening around us and support others in our sphere. And then the Buddha goes on to talk about, it's 10:31. I'm gonna keep going a little bit. If anybody has to leave, feel free to go. But he talks about these really kind of more frightful times of the month, like full moon or new moon time. And, there have been quite a few people who have observed, like in emergency rooms, there's definitely an increase of weird things happening. Police have often talked about this around the full moon. And so there is some kind of experiential data around these kinds of sort of powerful times. And the Buddha said, what if during those awe-inspiring or hair-raising times, go to places where there might be, something that would provoke fear and dread, to really face it. And we see this in Ajahn Chah's life, his stillness flowing, how he, took a position in the cremation ground and, really trying to face the fear that was, socially conditioned for him, this fear of ghosts, and really face it. And so then the Buddha says, he did that, and then, he's staying there and a deer comes by, or a peacock snaps a twig, or the wind rustles the leaves. And then I'm thinking, is this the fear and dread? Am I going to feel this fear and dread? And then he's like, why do I always meditate expecting this fear to come? Now remember, he's not enlightened yet. Why don't I get rid of that fear and dread just as it comes, while remaining just as I am? So this is where he was like, if he's sitting and that comes upon him, he's just going to continue sitting and meditating until it goes away. That confidence that this is impermanent, it's not going to last. I can maintain whatever posture I have. If I'm walking, I keep doing walking meditation. If I'm lying down, keep lying down mindfully, feeling that fear and dread, but noticing that it's going to unravel and disappear. And maybe standing. And then there's a story, Ajahn Pasano at his kuti, doing walking meditation out in the forest alone, and a tiger comes up, and he can see the tiger's right there watching him. And he's doing walking meditation. Okay, he keeps doing walking meditation back and forth, same speed. And someone says, but weren't you afraid? Of course I was afraid. And the tiger's watching. And you know, probably the steadiness of Ajahn Pasano's attitude and movement. You know, that tiger didn't see him as prey. That tiger didn't see him as a threat. And the tiger went back into the forest. And it's like, okay, there's no guarantees, but maybe this is a powerful approach to working with our own fear and dread as it arises. Maybe we don't have tigers. We have mountain lions where we are, but I haven't seen them. I think I'm going to let go of the rest of the sutta. I encourage you to read it for yourself. And I want to really thank everyone for their input earlier today. We learn and support each other in this life through all of its many changes and passages from which every one of which we can learn from and use as practice. So if anyone wants to stay on a little bit longer, you're welcome if you have questions. And I really appreciate everyone's practice. Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Yes, Maybell.
In case of fear, for example, I'm thinking it's not a tiger. It could be something in a relationship with a family member. I am thinking in this way. Fear is arising, and I can remember my own goodness when I have done good for that person, or when I have wished to actually meet them with care. And then also rest upon the fact that I'm following the path. Like that will be an approach.
That's it. You got it. That's right. And it can be those recollections of our own virtue, of our own generosity. You know, it can be the recollections of our own faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. You know, like you said, doing good for that person, or just doing good in any way. And there's, you know, our thinking is what gets us into trouble, and we can use our thinking to get us out of trouble. And we need to learn how to do that. Yeah, thank you, Maybell.
Thank you.
Serena?
I wanted to write down the sutta that you were using. I'm not tracking very well right now, so I'll need to.
Okay, it's number 4 in the middle length discourses.
Sutta number 4, middle length.
Yeah.
Is there a name or?
Yep, it's called Fear and Dread.
Okay. And you just said learn. We have to learn how to, how'd you put it? How to not.
How to use our thinking. We have to learn how to use our thinking to get us out of trouble.
Okay. Learn how to use our thinking. I have to write, I'm sorry, to get us out of trouble. That is a huge, urgent, important one for me, and I'll need to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Because that's what's up, no question.
Yeah.
Because you said something about while observing and witnessing the emotions. And I realized that all these 30 years of meditating, maybe it's the CPTSD neurological thing in the brain that happens. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to have to learn how to somehow bypass that when the emotions come up, because I just get caught in the feeling of the emotion without any way. There is a way to re-regulate that neurological injury. Maybe if I stop when the emotion comes and do that re-regulation, I don't know, maybe we can brainstorm how to get around this problem of not being able to observe, because it goes right into the feeling and gets stuck in the feeling.
Yeah, and each of us has to practice stepping back. And I know you've done a bunch of work on this, stepping back and seeing it as an object to us. It's kind of like, sometimes I feel like I take it out of my body and put it right here in front of me. I can really be present with it.
Okay, so when you say seeing it as an object, you literally mean, say it's anger. Okay, you literally mean, instead of me going into my body and feeling this, all this stuff that's going on angry, which doesn't seem to do anything much except stir it up more, actually sort of step back from it. And like, I like that idea, putting it outside where I can look at it like it is an object, not this thing inside me that's running me that I can't get unhooked from.
Yes.
So literally,
you're observing it. Yes, you're observing it. And then you're noticing that there is that which is observing it. The part that's watching isn't caught up in the anger.
Okay.
It's not angry. It's just watching it.
Okay, I don't know where I've been for 30 years, but I guess caught in the neurological brain thing. But now that I have that peace, I think if I can re-regulate, learn somehow to tie that anger feeling in me to, okay, stop, re-regulate that brain in that moment, and then look at it out there as an object with not an I am that, but an I that's not necessarily an I, but that which can observe it.
Yep.
Okay, this is huge in terms of being able to even begin to do this.
Yeah.
But I want to, I think when this is over, to this, I think that's why I have this wanting to have a year of like a semi-seclusion to go into these deep things. And I'll need some help with that.
For sure. Thank you, Serena.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. Take care and stay well. And I wish you all the best with your practice.